Catherine, we're restructuring the department. We need you to pack your things quietly and transition your accounts to Jennifer by Friday. I sat there in Douglas Hartman's corner office, looking at his self-satisfied smirk, and I did something that probably surprised him. I smiled, not the bitter smile of someone who's been betrayed, not the angry smile of someone about to explode, just a calm, genuine smile. Of course, Douglas, I understand completely. 20 years is a good run, and I'm grateful for the opportunity to have served Datatech Solutions. I watched his eyebrows furrow slightly. He'd probably expected tears, maybe some begging, perhaps even anger. What he didn't expect was grace. What he certainly didn't expect was gratitude. Jennifer will do an excellent job, I continued, glancing at the 35-year-old MBA sitting beside him, her perfectly manicured nails drumming nervously on her tablet. I'll make sure the transition is seamless. Douglas relaxed back into his leather chair, clearly pleased with how smoothly this was going. Jennifer gave me what I'm sure she thought was a sympathetic look. But what Douglas didn't know was that I had known about this conversation for 6 weeks. What Jennifer didn't know was that every account she thought she was inheriting had already been compromised. And what neither of them knew was that in those 6 weeks, I had been very, very busy. My name is Catherine Rodriguez, and at 48 years old, I had just been fired from the job I'd held for exactly 20 years, 2 months, and 16 days. Not that I was counting. When I started at Datatech Solutions in 2004, I was a 28-year-old account coordinator with a business degree, a mountain of student loans, and something my mother always called that stubborn Rodriguez determination. Over 2 decades, I had built myself into senior account executive, managing a portfolio worth $12 million annually, which, if you're keeping track, represented roughly 60% of Datatech's total revenue. I didn't just manage accounts, I cultivated relationships. I remembered birthdays, anniversary dates, the names of my clients' children and grandchildren. When David Morrison's tech company nearly collapsed in 2018, I spent 3 weeks working 18-hour days to restructure his entire system architecture. When Lisa Rodriguez, no relation despite the name, needed to modernize her family's manufacturing business, I personally designed a workflow solution that increased their efficiency by 43%. These weren't just professional relationships, they were human connections. In an industry where most executives saw clients as numbers on a spreadsheet, I saw them as people with problems that needed solving and dreams that needed supporting. But here's the thing about being a competent woman in corporate America. Your competence makes certain people very, very uncomfortable. Douglas Hartman had been CEO of Datatech for 5 years, and in that time, he'd perfected the art of taking credit for other people's work, while somehow making them grateful for the privilege. He had a particular talent for remembering my ideas just long enough to present them as his own in board meetings. Catherine's always been such a valuable team player, he'd say, which in corporate speak means she does the work while I get the recognition. Jennifer Hayes had joined our team 18 months ago, fresh from Wharton with an MBA, 3 impressive internships, and absolutely 0 real-world experience. She was smart, I'll give her that, and eager to learn, which is why I'd spent the better part of a year and a half training her, sharing my client management strategies, and teaching her the subtle art of corporate relationship building. What I didn't realize was that I was training my own replacement. Datatech Solutions specialized in corporate system integration. Essentially, we helped companies make their various software platforms talk to each other efficiently. It sounds boring, but in a world where most businesses run on a patchwork of different programs that don't communicate well, we were digital translators, making millions of dollars in efficiency possible. The company had been built on relationships, the kind of deep trust-based partnerships that take years to develop and can disappear overnight if handled poorly. Which is why it had always baffled me that Douglas, who had the relationship skills of a particularly aggressive used car salesman, had somehow maneuvered himself into the CEO position. But I understood the game. Douglas was tall, white, well-connected, and had the kind of confident handshake that impressed investors. I was a Latina woman who actually did the work. In the corporate hierarchy, that meant he belonged in corner offices, making strategic decisions, while I belonged in conference rooms, making those decisions actually work. The writing had been on the wall for months, though I hadn't wanted to see it. Jennifer's sudden involvement in high-level client meetings, Douglas's increasing references to fresh perspectives and new energy, the way my name had started disappearing from project credits and email chains. 3 months ago, I'd discovered that Jennifer was making $38,000 more than me annually, despite having less than 2 years of experience compared to my 20. When I'd brought this to HR, I was told that salary discussions are confidential and that I should focus on my own professional development rather than comparing myself to colleagues. 2 months ago, my office had been moved from the executive floor to what Douglas cheerfully called the collaboration zone, a fancy name for the cramped space near the break room where junior employees worked. 6 weeks ago, I accidentally received an email that changed everything. It was a Friday afternoon, and I was cleaning out my inbox when I noticed a message that had been forwarded to me by mistake. The subject line read, "Phase out plan, confidential."
I almost deleted it without reading. Corporate emails with dramatic subject lines were usually about office supply budget cuts or new coffee machine protocols, but something about the phrase "phase out" made me click. The email was from Douglas to Jennifer, and it was dated 3 days earlier. "Jennifer, per our discussion, we need to begin the Catherine transition immediately. 8-week timeline for complete phase-out. Have her train you on all major accounts, then we'll restructure her position out of existence. She's become too expensive for the value she provides, and frankly, clients respond better to fresh faces. Let's position this as a natural evolution rather than a termination. I'll handle the final conversation." I read it 3 times before the words fully registered. Too expensive for the value I provided, fresh faces. 20 years of building this company's most valuable relationships, and I had become too expensive. That's when I realized I wasn't just being replaced, I was being erased, and that's when I decided that if they wanted to erase Catherine Rodriguez, I would make sure they never forgot her name. I sat in my car in the Datatech parking lot for 20 minutes after reading that email, staring at the words on my phone screen until they blurred together. Too expensive for the value she provides. The phrase kept repeating in my head like a broken record. 20 years of 60-hour weeks, 20 years of client dinners, weekend emergency calls, and vacation days sacrificed to meet impossible deadlines. 20 years of watching my ideas get presented by other people while I smiled and nodded from the back of the room. And it all came down to being too expensive. I thought about my mortgage, my daughter's college tuition, the retirement savings I'd been building for 2 decades. I thought about starting over at 48 in an industry that worships youth and treats experience like an outdated operating system. But mostly, I thought about how incredibly stupid they were being. See, what Douglas and Jennifer didn't understand about my client relationships was that they weren't really Datatech's relationships at all. They were mine. When David Morrison needed a system upgrade, he didn't call Datatech's main number and ask for the senior account executive. He called my direct line and asked for Catherine. When Lisa Rodriguez had questions about her quarterly maintenance, she didn't email the company's general support address. She texted me personally. Over 20 years, I hadn't just built a client portfolio. I had built a professional family. And families don't abandon each other just because someone changes companies. The email had mentioned an 8-week timeline, which meant I had 8 weeks to document every relationship, every project detail, every piece of institutional knowledge that Douglas thought Jennifer could simply absorb through osmosis. But as I sat in that parking lot, a different kind of timeline started forming in my mind. 8 weeks wasn't enough time for them to replace me properly, but it was plenty of time for me to plan something they'd never see coming. I pulled up my contact list and scrolled until I found a name I hadn't called in almost 2 years, Julian Ross. Julian had been my colleague at Datatech until 2022, when he'd left to join Syntech Innovations, our biggest competitor. We'd remained friendly, grabbing coffee every few months to complain about industry trends and share war stories about difficult clients. I hadn't talked to him since Christmas, but I remembered our last conversation clearly. He'd mentioned that Syntech was struggling to break into the mid-market sector, exactly the space where Datatech dominated. If I could just find a way to crack that nut, he'd said, we'd double our revenue in 18 months. I dialed his number. "Catherine Rodriguez." Julian's voice was warm with surprise. "To what do I owe this unexpected pleasure?" Julian, I have a hypothetical question for you. I love hypothetical questions. Shoot. What if I told you that Datatech's entire mid-market portfolio might become available in the very near future? There was a long pause. I'd say that sounds less hypothetical and more like the best news I've heard all year. What's going on? Before I explain what I told Julian that day, you need to understand the pattern that had brought me to that parking lot conversation. The first time Douglas took credit for my work was in 2019, barely 6 months after he'd been promoted to CEO. I'd spent 3 months developing a new client onboarding process that reduced setup time by 60% and increased client satisfaction scores across the board. When the process was presented to the board of directors, Douglas gave a 20-minute presentation about his vision for streamlined operations without mentioning my name once. When I privately approached him afterward, he gave me that patronizing smile and said, "Catherine, you know how much I value your contributions. But leadership means taking responsibility for your team's successes and failures. This was a team effort." The second time was the Morrison project. When David Morrison's company was hemorrhaging money due to system incompatibilities, I designed a custom integration solution that saved his business. The case study of that project won Datatech an Industry Innovation Award. Douglas accepted the award on stage, thanking the dedicated team that made this success possible, while I watched from the audience. The third time was the Rodriguez manufacturing modernization. Ironic, given our shared last name. I'd spent months developing a workflow solution that revolutionized their entire production process. When the project was featured in Industry Weekly magazine, the article quoted Douglas extensively about Datatech's cutting-edge approach to legacy system integration. My name appeared once in the final paragraph as Project Coordinator. Project Coordinator, after designing the entire solution, but the money was the real slap in the face. 2 years ago, I'd discovered that Michael Chen, a junior executive with 5 years of experience, was making more than me. When I asked HR about it, they explained that Michael had different responsibilities and that salary structures are complex. Last year, I found out that Jennifer, with her 18 months of experience, was earning $38,000 more than my 20-year veteran salary. When I requested a meeting with Douglas to discuss this disparity, he told me that discussing salaries was unprofessional and that I should focus on my own growth rather than comparing myself to others. My own growth. After 2 decades of growing Datatech from a small regional company to a $12 million operation, the office relocation was just the latest insult. Moving me from the executive floor to the collaboration zone wasn't about collaboration. It was about making me invisible. Hard to take credit for someone's work if clients can't find them to ask questions. But the thing about making someone invisible is that it also makes them free to operate without oversight. "Julian," I said, settling back into my car seat, "what if I told you that I might be looking for new opportunities in the very near future?" "Catherine, you've been at Datatech for 2 decades. What's changed?" I gave him the condensed version, the email, the timeline, the systematic erasure of my contributions. As I talked, I could practically hear the wheels turning in his head. "So they're planning to phase you out while having you train your replacement?" "That appears to be the strategy." "And they think your clients will just transfer their loyalty to someone they've never met?" "That appears to be the assumption." Julian laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Catherine, I've been trying to break into Datatech's client base for 2 years. Do you know what every single one of them tells me when I make a pitch?" "What's that?" "They tell me they're perfectly happy with their current account executive. They mention you by name, not the company you." This was exactly what I'd hoped to hear, but hearing it confirmed sent a surge of validation through my chest. "Julian, what if I told you I've been developing some ideas for next-generation integration solutions, things that could leapfrog anything currently on the market?" "I'd say Syntech would be very interested in hearing about those ideas." "And what if I told you that the clients who trust me might be interested in innovative solutions from a company that values experience and expertise?" "Catherine, are you proposing what I think you're proposing?" I took a deep breath. What I was about to say would change everything. I'm proposing that Datatech has made a very expensive mistake, and I'm proposing that their mistake could become Syntech's biggest opportunity. When can we meet? How about tomorrow? I think 8 weeks is plenty of time to plan something extraordinary. That night, I sat at my kitchen table with a legal pad and started writing. Not a resignation letter. I wasn't planning to resign. I was planning something much more interesting. At the top of the page, I wrote, Operation Fresh Faces. If Douglas wanted fresh faces, I was going to give him one, mine, just not in the way he expected. While they were planning my exit, I was planning their downfall. And the beautiful thing about being underestimated for 20 years is that nobody expects you to be capable of strategic thinking. They were about to learn how wrong they were. The first rule of corporate warfare is documentation. If you don't have it in writing, it didn't happen. Fortunately, after 20 years of being meticulous about everything, I had documentation for things Douglas had probably forgotten he'd ever said.
Week 1 of my secret preparation began the Monday after my parking lot conversation with Julian. On the surface, I was the model employee, showing up early, staying late, dutifully training Jennifer on my accounts as requested. But while Jennifer was learning about client preferences and project histories, I was quietly creating the most comprehensive archive of Datatech's intellectual property that had ever existed. You see, when you've been somewhere for 20 years, you accumulate digital artifacts. Email threads from 2019, where I outlined the systems architecture that became our core service offering. Project files from 2020, where I detailed the efficiency algorithms that Douglas later presented as his own innovation. Meeting notes from 2021, where I proposed the client retention strategies that had become company policy. 20 years of ideas, innovations, and intellectual property that had my fingerprints all over them. Even if my name had been carefully removed from the final presentations, I spent my evenings at home organizing these files into what I privately called the Catherine Archive. Every email that proved my authorship of major Datatech innovations, every document that showed my strategic thinking behind key company decisions, every piece of evidence that demonstrated I wasn't just an account executive, I was the architect of Datatech's success. But documentation was just the foundation. The real work was relationship mapping. I created a detailed spreadsheet of every client I'd worked with over 2 decades, not just current accounts, but former clients who'd moved to other companies, retired executives who still had influence in their industries, and the extended network of relationships that 20 years of professional excellence creates. David Morrison wasn't just the CEO of Morrison Tech Solutions. He was also on the board of 3 other companies and had mentored a dozen other executives who'd gone on to leadership positions across the industry. When David trusted you, his entire network paid attention. Lisa Rodriguez wasn't just the owner of Rodriguez Manufacturing. Her family business was part of a consortium of mid-market manufacturers who regularly shared recommendations about service providers. When Lisa was happy with a vendor, her influence rippled through dozens of similar companies. Robert Kim wasn't just the founder of Kimtech Innovations. He was a serial entrepreneur who'd started 4 successful companies and served as an advisor to countless others. When Robert endorsed a solution, people listened. I hadn't just built individual client relationships, I had built a network of influence that extended far beyond Datatech's official client list. Week 2 was about discreetly testing that network. I started scheduling what I called relationship maintenance meetings with key clients. Ostensibly, these were routine check-ins to ensure satisfaction with current services and identify future needs. In reality, they were intelligence-gathering operations. David, I hope you don't mind me asking, but if something were to happen to me at Datatech, hypothetically speaking, who would you want to work with for your system integration needs? David's answer was immediate and absolute. Catherine, if you ever leave Datatech, you just tell me where you're going. My loyalty is to competence, not to company letterhead. Similar conversations with Lisa, Robert, and 8 other key clients confirmed what I'd suspected. Their relationships were with me, not with Datatech. They were paying Datatech for access to Catherine Rodriguez's expertise and problem-solving abilities. Week 3 was when things got interesting. Julian and I started meeting regularly, Always at different locations, always under the pretense of old colleagues catching up over coffee, we began sketching out what would become Synergy Core, a next-generation integration platform that would address every limitation I'd identified in Datatech's current offerings over the past 5 years. The beautiful thing about being an overlooked employee is that nobody pays attention to your ideas until after they've become successful. I had notebooks full of innovations that I'd proposed to Douglas over the years, only to be told they were too complicated or not aligned with current priorities. Synergy Core would incorporate every single one of those rejected ideas. But Julian brought something equally valuable to our partnership: resources. Syntech had the development budget and technical infrastructure to build what I could envision. More importantly, they had the corporate structure to ensure that my contributions would be properly credited and compensated. "Catherine," Julian said during one of our coffee meetings, "I want to be very clear about something. This isn't just about recruiting you. This is about partnering with you. Whatever we build together, your name goes on it. No exceptions." Week 4 was about legal protection. I scheduled a consultation with Maria Santos, an employment attorney who specialized in intellectual property disputes. I needed to understand exactly what I could and couldn't do without violating any agreements I'd signed with Datatech. "Catherine, I've reviewed your employment contract," Maria said, spreading documents across her conference table. "The good news is that Datatech's intellectual property clauses are surprisingly narrow. They claim ownership of work you do using company resources during company time on company projects." "And the bad news?" "There is no bad news. The ideas you're describing, the innovations you developed on your own time, the relationship-building strategies you created through personal effort, the client networks you built through individual excellence, none of that belongs to Datatech." She leaned forward, her expression serious. "Catherine, what you're planning is not only legal, it's exactly what Datatech deserves for undervaluing your contributions. Just make sure you document everything." Documentation. Always back to documentation. Week 5 was about team building. I'd noticed that I wasn't the only Datatech employee who'd become quietly dissatisfied with the company's direction. Tom Matthews, our senior systems architect, had been passed over for promotion 3 times in favor of external hires. Sarah Chen, our client relations specialist, had been excluded from strategic planning meetings despite managing some of our most complex accounts. Marcus Williams, our technical integration expert, had watched his innovative solutions get credited to other departments repeatedly. These weren't just my colleagues, they were my friends. We'd worked together for years, solved impossible problems together, and watched our contributions get minimized together. During casual conversations, I began testing their satisfaction with the current situation. "Tom, have you ever thought about what you'd do if you had the freedom to design systems without committee oversight?" "Sarah, do you ever wonder what it would be like to work somewhere that actually valued client relationship expertise?" "Marcus, would you be interested in implementing solutions where your innovations would be properly recognized?" By the end of week 5, I had 3 unofficial partners in what was becoming less of a job change and more of a strategic exodus. Week 6 was about finalizing the details. Julian and I had developed Synergy Core from concept to prototype. We had funding approval from Syntech's board. We had legal clearance for the intellectual property transfer. We had a team ready to implement solutions that would leapfrog anything Datatech currently offered. Most importantly, we had a client list that was ready to follow competence wherever it led. Synergy Core wasn't just a better version of Datatech's integration platform, it was a complete reimagining of how corporate systems should communicate. For 5 years, I'd been proposing enhancements to Datatech's core offering, predictive integration protocols that could anticipate system conflicts before they occurred, dynamic scaling architecture that could adapt to client growth without requiring complete reconfiguration, real-time optimization algorithms that could continuously improve performance based on usage patterns. Every proposal had been shot down as too complex or outside our current capabilities. What Douglas never understood was that too complex usually means requires actual expertise to implement. Working with Syntech's development team, I finally had the resources to build solutions that matched my vision. Julian gave me complete autonomy over the technical specifications, and for the first time in decades, I was designing systems without having to accommodate corporate politics or budget limitations. The core innovation of Synergy Core was what I called adaptive integration. Instead of forcing different software platforms to communicate through rigid, predetermined protocols, Synergy Core would learn each system's unique characteristics and create custom communication pathways that evolved over time. It was like the difference between forcing people who speak different languages to use a basic translation dictionary versus providing them with a professional interpreter who understands cultural nuances and can adapt their communication style to achieve perfect understanding. The efficiency improvements were dramatic. Our beta testing showed that Synergy Core could reduce integration time by 40% while improving system reliability by 60% compared to traditional platforms, including Datatech's current offering. But the real breakthrough was the client experience interface. I'd spent 20 years listening to clients complain about integration projects that required extensive training, constant maintenance, and regular expert intervention. Synergy Core was designed to be genuinely intuitive, sophisticated enough to handle complex enterprise requirements, but simple enough that clients could manage most operations independently. "Catherine," Julian said during one of our development review meetings, "this isn't just better than what Datatech offers. This is better than anything on the market." "That's the point," I replied. "For 20 years, I've been implementing other people's compromised visions. This is what happens when you let competence operate without artificial limitations." We filed provisional patents for 7 different innovations incorporated into Synergy Core. Every patent application listed Catherine Rodriguez as the primary inventor. By early February, we had a fully functional platform ready for market deployment. We had a marketing strategy that positioned Synergy Core as the next evolution in system integration. We had a sales process designed around the kind of relationship-based client service that I'd perfected over 2 decades. Most importantly, we had a list of prospective clients who'd already expressed interest in innovative solutions from providers who valued their expertise and experience. I hadn't just built a better product, I had built a better company. Friday, February 16th, the day that Douglas and Jennifer had scheduled for what they thought would be my quiet exit from Datatech. I arrived at the office that morning, knowing it would be my last day, but not for the reasons they expected. The meeting was scheduled for 2 p.m. in Douglas's office. I spent the morning doing exactly what I'd been doing for 6 weeks, training Jennifer on my accounts, while secretly documenting every interaction that demonstrated client loyalty to me, personally, rather than to Datatech institutionally. "Catherine," Jennifer said during our final training session, "I really appreciate how thorough you've been with this transition. I know this must be difficult for you." She genuinely seemed to believe that she was being compassionate. In her mind, she was the promising young executive being given an opportunity, and I was the aging employee being gracefully eased into retirement. "Jennifer, I want you to succeed," I told her, and I meant it. "Just remember that these relationships took decades to build. They require constant attention and genuine care." "Of course," she nodded, scrolling through the client files on her tablet. "I'm sure once they get to know me, the transition will be seamless." I didn't tell her that David Morrison had already called me that morning to ask about rumors he'd heard regarding changes to his account management. I didn't mention that Lisa Rodriguez had sent me a personal email expressing concern about service continuity. I definitely didn't share that Robert Kim had texted me. "Catherine, whatever's happening at Datatech, just promise me you'll let me know where you land." At 2 p.m., I knocked on Douglas's office door. "Catherine, come in, come in." Douglas gestured toward the chair across from his desk. Jennifer was already seated, her tablet ready to take notes about the transition timeline. "Catherine, as we discussed, Datatech is evolving, and we've made some difficult decisions about restructuring." I nodded attentively. "Your position is being eliminated as part of our efficiency initiative, but we want to ensure a smooth transition for your clients. Jennifer will be taking over your accounts effective Monday." "I understand completely," I said. "How can I best support this transition?" Douglas looked pleased with my cooperative attitude. "We'll need you to spend Monday morning introducing Jennifer to your key clients. and then we'll handle the formal announcements about the restructuring. Of course, I'll make sure Jennifer has everything she needs. We're prepared to offer you a generous severance package, Douglas continued, sliding a folder across his desk. 8 weeks of salary, plus continuation of benefits for 3 months. I opened the folder and reviewed the paperwork. 8 weeks of salary for 20 years of building their business. Generous indeed. This seems fair, I said, signing the documents without hesitation. Douglas and Jennifer exchanged satisfied glances. Everything was going exactly as they'd planned. Catherine, I want you to know how much we've appreciated your contributions to Datatech, Douglas said, with what I'm sure he thought was sincere warmth. You've been a valuable team member, and we wish you the best in your future endeavors. Thank you, Douglas. Working here has been an incredible learning experience. I shook hands with both of them, collected my personal items from my desk, and left the building at exactly 5 p.m. As I walked to my car, I pulled out my phone and sent a single text message to Julian. It's official. Operation Fresh Faces begins Monday at 7 a.m. That weekend, I didn't think about Datatech at all. Instead, I focused on the press release that Syntech's marketing team had prepared, the client communication strategy we'd developed, and the new business cards that had just arrived with my name and title. Catherine Rodriguez, Senior Vice President of Strategic Integration, Syntech Innovations. Monday morning would tell a very different story than the one Douglas and Jennifer were expecting. They thought they had won. They thought they'd successfully eliminated an expensive employee while preserving her valuable client relationships. What they didn't realize was that they'd just made the most costly mistake in Datatech's 20-year history. At exactly 7 o'clock a.m. on Monday, February 19th, while Douglas was probably still drinking his first cup of coffee, and Jennifer was preparing for what she thought would be her triumphant first day managing my former accounts, Syntech Innovations issued a press release that would change everything. The headline read, Datatech Senior Executive, Catherine Rodriguez, joins Syntech Innovations, launching revolutionary Synergy Core integration platform. The press release went out simultaneously to industry publications, business journals, and every major client in the mid-market integration space. But more importantly, it went directly to the email addresses of every single person I'd worked with over the past 20 years. Within minutes, my phone started ringing. The first call was from David Morrison. Catherine, I just saw the news. Congratulations. When can we schedule a meeting about Synergy Core? Morrison Tech is ready to be your first client. The second call was from Lisa Rodriguez. Catherine, Rodriguez Manufacturing wants to be part of whatever you're building. We trust your judgment completely. The third call was from Robert Kim. Catherine, this is exactly what the industry needs. Kimtech is in. By 7:30 a.m., I had commitments from 3 major clients representing $2.8 million in annual revenue, clients who hadn't even seen a full Synergy Core demonstration yet, but who trusted Catherine Rodriguez enough to commit based on her reputation alone. At 8:15 a.m., my former desk phone at Datatech started ringing, then Douglas's direct line, then the main company number. I didn't answer any of them. At 8:45 a.m., I received the first email from Douglas. Catherine, we need to talk immediately. There seems to be some confusion about your client transition responsibilities. At 9:15 a.m., the second email. Catherine, this is extremely unprofessional. Jennifer is fielding calls from clients who seem to think you're working somewhere else. Please respond immediately. At 9:30 a.m., the third email. Catherine, if you don't respond within the hour, we'll be forced to take legal action for breach of your transition obligations. I forwarded all 3 emails to Maria Santos, my employment attorney, with a note. As discussed, they're responding exactly as predicted. Meanwhile, at Datatech's offices, chaos was unfolding. Jennifer, who had expected to spend Monday morning receiving warm handoff calls from grateful clients, instead found herself explaining to confused and increasingly concerned customers why their trusted account executive had suddenly left the company. I'm sorry, Mr. Morrison, but Catherine Rodriguez is no longer with Datatech. I'm Jennifer Hayes, and I'll be managing your account going forward. What do you mean she's no longer with Datatech? I just got a press release saying she joined Syntech. Are you telling me Datatech let Catherine Rodriguez go? Well, there was a restructuring and you restructured out Catherine Rodriguez, the woman who saved my company. Transfer me to your CEO immediately. Similar conversations were happening across Jennifer's entire client list, except Jennifer didn't have answers, because Douglas had never expected that clients would find out about my departure through industry press releases announcing my new position at a competitor. By 10 a.m., Douglas was fielding angry calls from clients he hadn't spoken to personally in years, clients who were demanding explanations for why Datatech had lost Catherine Rodriguez and wanting to know how this would affect their service agreements. At 10:30 a.m., while Douglas was trying to manage the client crisis, Tom Matthews, Sarah Chen, and Marcus Williams knocked on his office door. "Douglas, we need to have a conversation," Tom said, carrying an envelope that Douglas probably should have recognized as a resignation letter. "Not now, Tom. We're dealing with a situation." "Actually, this is about the situation," Sarah interrupted. "We're here to inform you that we're resigning effective immediately to join Catherine Rodriguez at Syntec Innovations." Douglas stopped mid-sentence, his phone still ringing with angry client calls in the background. "You're what?" Marcus stepped forward. "Douglas, Catherine offered us positions at Syntec, where our contributions will be properly recognized and compensated. We've accepted. You can't all resign simultaneously. You have contractual obligations." Tom handed him the envelope. "Our contracts allow for resignation with 2 weeks' notice, which we're providing. However, since Datatech has demonstrated a pattern of restructuring employees out of their positions without notice, we've decided to invoke the clause that allows immediate resignation in cases of hostile work environment." Sarah added, "Our attorney has confirmed that Datatech's treatment of Catherine Rodriguez constitutes a hostile work environment for all senior employees who might be similarly targeted." Douglas opened the envelope and found 3 identical resignation letters, each citing the same legal precedent and each offering to fulfill contractual obligations remotely during the 2-week notice period. "This is impossible," Douglas said. "You can't all leave. We have projects, deadlines, client commitments." "Yes," Marcus replied calmly, "you do, and now you'll need to fulfill them without the 4 people who actually did the work." The beautiful irony wasn't lost on any of us. For years, Douglas had taken credit for our innovations while treating us as replaceable. Now he was discovering just how irreplaceable we actually were. But the resignations were just the beginning. At 11 a.m., I sent personalized emails to 43 former clients, industry contacts, and professional associates. Each message was carefully crafted to reflect our specific relationship history. "Dear David, I wanted to personally let you know about an exciting new chapter in my career. After 20 years at Datatech, I've joined Syntec Innovations as Senior Vice President of Strategic Integration. I'm reaching out because your success has always been my priority, and I want to ensure you have the best possible solutions for your integration needs. I'd love to show you what we're building with SynergyCore. I think you'll find it addresses every limitation we've discussed over the years." By noon, I had response commitments from 18 potential clients, representing over $6 million in annual revenue opportunity, but the real devastation was just beginning. At 12:30 p.m., Douglas finally reached me by calling Syntec's main number and asking to be transferred to Catherine Rodriguez. "Catherine, what the hell do you think you're doing?" "Hello, Douglas. I'm working. What can I help you with?" "You know exactly what I'm talking about. This stunt you're pulling is unprofessional and potentially illegal." "I'm not sure what you mean. I've joined a new company, which is perfectly legal. I've announced my new position, which is standard practice, and I've reached out to professional contacts to inform them of my career change, which is common courtesy." "You're stealing our clients." "Douglas, I can't steal something that was never yours. These are professional relationships I built over 20 years. The clients are choosing to follow competence and expertise, which is their right. We'll sue you for breach of contract, theft of proprietary information, tortious interference." "Douglas, I'd recommend you speak with your legal team before making threats. My employment attorney has reviewed every action I've taken, and I'm confident you'll find that I've violated nothing." There was a long pause. In the background, I could hear Jennifer's voice explaining to someone why their project timeline might need to be adjusted. Catherine, be reasonable. We can work something out. Come back to Datatech. I'm sure we can negotiate better terms. Douglas, you had 20 years to negotiate better terms. You chose to restructure me out of existence instead. I'm quite happy with my new terms at Syntec. This isn't over. You're absolutely right. It's just beginning. At 2:00 p.m., Datatech's board. At 2:00 p.m., Datatech's board of directors held an emergency meeting. By 3:30 p.m., they had voted unanimously to terminate Douglas Hartman's employment as CEO, citing gross mismanagement resulting in catastrophic loss of institutional knowledge and client relationships. The board's statement was brief, but devastating. Datatech Solutions regrets the departure of Catherine Rodriguez and her team, which has resulted in significant disruption to our operations. We are conducting a comprehensive review of executive decision-making processes that led to this situation. In corporate speak, that was a public execution. Jennifer Hayes, who had expected to spend her Monday celebrating her promotion to senior account executive, instead found herself trying to manage 47 client accounts with zero institutional knowledge, no technical expertise, and no relationship history. By 4:00 p.m., 6 more clients had formally requested to terminate their Datatech contracts. By 5:00 p.m., Datatech's stock price had dropped 12% based on rumors about client defections and management instability. But the final blow came at 5:30 p.m., when Syntec issued a second press release announcing that SynergyCorp had secured its first major client contracts, representing significant market validation for next-generation integration solutions. The press release included a quote from David Morrison. Catherine Rodriguez has consistently delivered innovative solutions that drive real business value. SynergyCorp represents the future of system integration, and Morrison Tech is proud to be an early adopter. What the press release didn't mention was that David Morrison was also announcing Morrison Tech's departure from Datatech after 8 years of partnership. That evening, I sat in my new office at Syntec, an actual corner office, with windows and my name on the door, reviewing the day's results. 12 confirmed client transitions to Syntec, representing $4.2 million in annual revenue. 4 senior Datatech employees who had resigned to join my team. 1 former CEO whose career in corporate leadership was effectively over. 1 company whose market valuation had dropped $8 million in a single day. And 1 Catherine Rodriguez, who had spent 20 years being underestimated, overlooked, and undervalued, but who had just demonstrated exactly what competence looks like when it's finally free to operate without artificial constraints. What I had built in 6 weeks had taken them 20 years to lose. 6 months later, I stood on the stage at the National Technology Integration Conference in Chicago, looking out at an audience of 1,200 industry professionals who had come to hear about revolutionary approaches to corporate system optimization. The keynote speaking invitation had arrived 4 months earlier, shortly after SynergyCorp had been featured on the cover of Integration Today magazine as the platform that's changing everything. The article had included interviews with clients who described 40% efficiency improvements, 60% reduction in system downtime, and what David Morrison called the kind of seamless integration we'd been dreaming about for years. But the speaking invitation meant more than professional recognition. It meant that Catherine Rodriguez was no longer invisible. "Good morning," I began, my voice carrying clearly across the conference hall. "My name is Catherine Rodriguez, Senior Vice President of Strategic Integration at Syntec Innovations, and I'm here to talk about what happens when competence is finally allowed to flourish." The presentation covered SynergyCorp's technical innovations, our client success stories, and the business philosophy that had guided our development process. But the real message was deeper, that underestimating experienced professionals doesn't just harm individuals, it damages entire organizations and industries. For too long, our industry has confused youth with innovation and mistaken experience for obsolescence, I told the audience. True innovation comes from combining deep expertise with creative problem-solving. It comes from understanding not just what technology can do, but what businesses actually need. During the question and answer session, a young woman in the front row raised her hand. Ms. Rodriguez, what advice would you give to experienced professionals who feel like their contributions are being overlooked? Document everything, I replied without hesitation. Your ideas, your innovations, your successes. Make sure there's a record. Because competence always finds a way to be recognized, even if it takes time. And when the opportunity comes to demonstrate your value, be ready. After the presentation, the same young woman approached me at the networking reception. Ms. Rodriguez, I'm Angela Thompson, a systems architect at Morrison Tech. I wanted to thank you personally. Thank you for what? For showing that experience matters. I'm 34, which makes me both too old to be considered a rising star and too young to be taken seriously as a veteran. Your story gives me hope that competence really does win in the end. Angela, competence always wins. Sometimes it just takes longer than we'd like. That evening, as I reviewed the business cards I'd collected from potential clients, industry partners, and professionals who wanted to learn more about SynergyCorp, I realized something profound had changed. For the first time in my career, people weren't just asking about what I could do for them, they were asking about what we could build together. The real validation came 8 months after my departure from Datatech, at the Women in Technology Leadership Summit in San Francisco. I had been invited to participate in a panel discussion about breaking barriers in corporate innovation, alongside 3 other executives who had transformed their industries through strategic thinking and persistent excellence. But the moment that crystallized everything happened during the coffee break between sessions. A young black woman approached me, her conference badge identifying her as Dr. Michelle Johnson, lead engineer at Quantum Systems. Ms. Rodriguez, I need to tell you something. Your story saved my career. I'm sorry? 6 months ago, I was ready to leave tech completely. I'd been at Quantum for 3 years, developing innovations that kept getting credited to other people. I felt invisible, undervalued, exactly like you described in your Integration Today interview. She pulled out her phone and showed me a screenshot of the article. When I read about how you documented everything and planned your strategic exit, it inspired me to do the same. I started keeping detailed records of my contributions. I began building relationships outside my company, and last month, when TechFlow offered me a senior engineering position with proper recognition and equity participation, I was ready. Michelle's eyes were bright with excitement. Ms. Rodriguez, I'm not just changing jobs, I'm changing my entire trajectory. And it's because you showed me that competence doesn't have to be invisible. Michelle, what you accomplished, that's all you. I just shared a story. You did the work. But you showed me that the work matters. That experience and expertise have value, even when other people don't recognize it immediately. 3 weeks later, I received an envelope in the mail with no return address. Inside was a brief handwritten note. Catherine, thought you'd want to see this. A friend. Attached was a copy of a job posting. Datatech Solutions seeks experienced senior account executive with minimum 15 years client relationship management experience. Competitive salary, comprehensive benefits, equity participation available for exceptional candidates. The posting was almost word-for-word identical to my original job description from 20 years earlier, but with one significant change. The salary range was $48,000 higher than what I'd been making when they restructured me out of existence. Below the job posting, someone had handwritten, Jennifer Hayes resigned last month after losing 60% of her client portfolio. They've been looking for her replacement for 3 months. No qualified candidates interested. I showed the posting to Julian during our weekly strategy meeting. Catherine, they're literally trying to hire you back. Not me specifically. They're trying to hire what I represented. 20 years of relationship building expertise that they convinced themselves was replaceable. Are you tempted? I laughed. Julian, why would I go back to being undervalued when I can stay here and build something extraordinary? That afternoon, I received a LinkedIn message from Jennifer Hayes herself. Catherine, I hope you don't mind me reaching out directly. I wanted to apologize for my role in what happened at Datatech. I genuinely didn't understand the value of what you'd built until I tried to maintain it myself. I'm actually wondering if Syntech might have opportunities for someone with my background. I'd love to learn from your approach to client relationship management. I stared at the message for several minutes, remembering the confident young MBA who had sat in Douglas's office 8 months earlier, taking notes about my transition timeline. I crafted a careful response. Jennifer, I appreciate your message and your honesty. Syntec is always interested in talented professionals who understand the value of relationship-based client service. We have a junior account coordinator position available that includes comprehensive mentorship in client relationship development. If you're interested in learning the fundamentals of this approach, I'd be happy to schedule an interview. Junior account coordinator. Exactly the position I'd held 24 years earlier when I'd started my career. Sometimes the best revenge is offering someone the chance to learn what they should have understood from the beginning. 1 year to the day after Douglas Hartman told me to pack my things quietly, I sat in my corner office at Syntec, reviewing the quarterly reports that told an extraordinary story. Synergy Core had captured 18% of the mid-market integration space in 12 months. We had 47 active clients, including 23 companies that had never worked with Syntec before my arrival. Our client retention rate was 94%, the highest in the industry. The team I'd assembled had grown from the original 4 Datatech refugees to 12 full-time employees, including 3 other experienced professionals who had left companies that undervalued their expertise. Tom Matthews was now Director of Technical Innovation, holding patents for 3 of the algorithms that made Synergy Core superior to traditional integration platforms. Sarah Chen led our Client Success Division, ensuring that every relationship received the kind of personal attention that builds long-term loyalty. Marcus Williams headed our implementation team, guaranteeing that our technical excellence translated into client satisfaction. But the metrics that mattered most weren't financial. Angela Thompson had been promoted to Senior Systems Architect at Morrison Tech and was leading their next-generation infrastructure project. Michelle Johnson had been featured in Tech Innovators magazine as one of 30 under 30 engineers transforming industry standards. Jennifer Hayes had completed our junior coordinator program and was building genuine client relationships based on competence rather than corporate positioning. The ripple effects of refusing to be invisible had extended far beyond my own career. That evening, I drafted an email to the conference organizers who had invited me to deliver the opening keynote at next year's Integration Summit. Thank you for the invitation to speak at next year's summit. I'd be honored to present on Building Sustainable Excellence, Why Experience and Innovation are Partners, Not Competitors. As I finished the email, my phone buzzed with a text from David Morrison. Catherine, Morrison Tech just signed our biggest contract ever, and it's specifically because of the Synergy Core advantages. Thank you for proving that loyalty to competence pays dividends. I leaned back in my chair and looked around my office. The walls held framed patents with my name as primary inventor. My desk displayed industry awards for innovation and client service excellence. The nameplate by my door read, Catherine Rodriguez, Senior Vice President of Strategic Integration, in letters large enough to be read from across the hallway. But the most satisfying element wasn't any of the visible markers of success. It was the knowledge that everything I'd built had my name on it. For 20 years, I had been the invisible force behind Datatech's success, watching other people take credit for my innovations while I remained grateful for the opportunity to contribute. I had accepted being undervalued because I believed that competence would eventually be recognized, that hard work would ultimately be rewarded. I was right about competence being recognized. I was just wrong about where that recognition would come from. What I built wasn't just a system or a company or a career. It was a standard. A demonstration that experience combined with innovation creates solutions that can't be replicated by corporate politics or artificial energy. The young MBA, who thought she could replace 20 years of relationship-building expertise with enthusiasm and an impressive degree, learned what every organization eventually discovers. Competence can't be restructured out of existence. It can only be redirected toward companies smart enough to value it properly. Douglas Hartman, who spent 5 years taking credit for other people's work while convincing himself that leadership meant managing, rather than creating, learned that underestimating competent people is always expensive. Always. And Catherine Rodriguez, who spent 2 decades being told she was valuable while being treated as replaceable, learned that sometimes the best thing that can happen to your career is being forced to prove your worth somewhere that actually understands it. The moral of this story isn't about revenge, though revenge certainly played a role. It's about recognition, about refusing to accept being invisible when you have something valuable to contribute, about understanding that your competence belongs to you, not to the company that happens to be paying for it at the moment. Most importantly, it's about the fact that when truly competent people are finally free to operate without artificial constraints, they don't just succeed, they transform entire industries. And this time, my name was on it.